So can I welcome to the stage Kriss to introduce your panel. So here we go. So the first panel today is about, I don't know if, is that working? Perfect. Zoom. Innovation in the arts. So we have experts from Story Future, Immerse UK, and Cornwall Museum Partnerships and the Immersive Museum Network. So if our panelists would be so kind to unmute themselves and we can start the discussion.
I'm here, Caitlin. Thank you very much. Looking forward to kicking off with everybody, and welcome everybody. My name's Kriss Baird. I'm one of the product managers at Musemio. I'm delighted to be kicking off this fantastic and hopefully inspirational event that we've got planned for you today. It is very much a mixture of insight, knowledge transfer, and practical interactive workshops. And this session today is the first of our sort of thought leadership, knowledge transfer, and insight sessions. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues, Asha, Amy, and Will, to introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about where they're from, and what their focus is within the context of the immersive landscape. And why don't we kick off with Amy? What can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Hi, thank you. Thanks so much for inviting me today. I'm Amy Shakespeare. I'm the Innovation Manager at Cornwall Museums Partnership. So Cornwall Museums Partnership is a charity in Cornwall, surprisingly, that works with museums to create positive social change. And my role there is really kind of head of research and development, mainly focusing on immersive tech.
Thank you very much, Amy. And why don't I come to you, Asha, next?
Great, thanks Kriss, and thanks for inviting me today. Hi everyone, I'm Asha Easton, and I lead an organization called Immerse UK. We're part of a wider organization called the KTN, Knowledge Transfer Network, and we are the UK's VR and AR professional network. We do plenty of work across the industry. We kind of cater equally towards the creative industries and also to all other kind of sectors that are impacted by immersive tech. And great to be here. Thanks, Kriss.
Thank you very much, Asha. And last but not least, Will, are you with us? Can you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name's Will Saunders. I am, or I act as Chief Creative Officer for two projects called Story Futures and Story Futures Academy. Those are creative industries cluster projects. We act to help grow the UK's immersive economy. We run a National Centre for Immersive Storytelling. We were announced yesterday as one of the 10 winners of a Festival 2022 commission, which hopefully I'll be able to tell you a little bit about later. And we're currently engaged on a collaboration with the National Gallery, working in partnership with the Museum of Science and Technology in Shanghai. So I've got an interest in helping grow creative practice, really, when it comes to immersive technologies and immersive storytelling. With regard to cultural sector engagement, I co-authored a report for DCMS in 2018 called Culture is Digital. And before that, I was a creative director at the BBC, managing digital production for BBC Studios.
Fantastic. So it's such an illustrious panel here, and I'm sure you've got so many valuable insights for our audience. You know, I guess just before we kick off, we're so overwhelmed and bowled over by the response to this this conference. So we're really grateful for your time, first of all. But let's kick off. So I think what I wanted to start with in this session was, you know, let's celebrate what's been happening over the last sort of 12 to 24 months. I'm really keen and interested to understand what excites you guys about the current sort of status quo and what's coming down in the near future. What sort of aspects of the immersive landscape or immersive technologies are you most excited about to see being used, and why? Asha, maybe if I can start with you.
Sure. So I would say that I'm just going to highlight a few projects that I find have been really inspiring, and I'm interested to see like what can be the future for them. So there's one project that was done by the Royal Shakespeare Company called Dream. Have all of you been to it? probably have.
Yes.
They've done some incredible R&D work that was funded by the Audience of the Future program. That I'm going to send a bunch of links as well, by the way, if everyone wants to check out these projects. But they did some really interesting work where they had like a live mocap performance that was streamed into audiences' homes on their computer, and then there was an interactive element to that performance. And I think that's that future of interactivity with live performance from venues like that is really interesting. I also think other projects I've seen that I really like are ones that are kind of multi-user AR experiences. There was some really interesting work that was done by Playlines with the National Gallery X as a residency, where they were looking at, you know, putting pieces of art into people's homes and allowing them to interact with it. And they had some really amazing engagement from audiences with that project. I'm interested in seeing the future of, you know, geospatial technology and geolocalizing AR experiences that will enable works from galleries or museums or anywhere else to be more widely spread. And the other thing I'm really interested in is probably the spread of 5G technology, which will enable more connectivity for venues that are potentially don't have that connectivity to enable these kinds of experiences. I think there's a lot of kind of enabling technology in the background that kind of needs to become a bit more ubiquitous to enable more galleries to have access. And there was a great project that was done by the Roman Baths. It's a couple of years old now. It was a pilot project that was really successful, and I'm interested to see that kind of become more accessible to other venues. So I'm going to send links to all those things in the chat. But
thanks, Asha.
yeah.
And Amy, I think that's a neat segue to pick up with you, because obviously this idea of sort of connectivity or the challenges with connectivity. I'm interested to understand more about your work down in the Southwest, and say maybe how this you've sort of seen the landscape develop, and what's sort of exciting you in your part of the world and maybe further afield.
Yeah, I think I would echo Asha's points about 5G. I think particularly in rural areas where there's previously been a lack of connectivity, we're really excited about exploring that and kind of the Internet of Things and the different potential that has for sort of real-time experiences. I think generally what really excites me is just that immersive tech really feels like it offers a totally new way of telling stories that we haven't perhaps been able to tell effectively before. And I think something that we're sort of looking at in Cornwall now is AI and machine learning, and how many applications that has for not only experiences, but also kind of other aspects of museum practice. And I think for me, I really like this kind of two-way between the audience feeding into these experiences, not only through user-centered design in the run-up to them being launched, but also around how we can kind of decolonize and democratize our stories as people can interact with them, and how we can then provide a personalized experience for kind of each person based on how they interact. So that's something kind of that we're looking at for the future. And I think that it shouldn't be forgotten what the sector can do for the tech sector and for the technology itself. I think that creativity and the cultural sector has a really important role to play in the development and in kind of the ethical implications of AI, and exploring that in a way that, you know, tech experts are telling me that they need that kind of A in the STEAM sort of sector to be able to look at. So yeah, we're really excited for kind of all of the things that it can do.
I'd like to just pick up on that, if that's okay. So when we're talking about AI and machine learning, maybe for our audience members that maybe haven't experienced it so overtly, perhaps in the cultural sector, what have been? Can you give like us an example of how you're sort of seeing that manifest?
Yeah, so we've got a really exciting project working with a tech company called Hi9, who specialise in chatbots. So you can actually train the bot to be able to recognise things that you hold up to it, or gestures that you know, you can put your thumbs up or do a Superman pose or anything like that, and it will react to you in a different way, or you can talk to it. So we're really looking at how we can utilize that technology, which doesn't need you to be able to know how to use a piece of kit necessarily, because you're just talking to it, to really kind of improve interpretation. So there's a turtle, kind of a taxidermy turtle at one of the museums, St Agnes Museum in Cornwall. And they've previously had a CD player where you sit down with headphones and you listen to a story about the turtle, you know, aimed at children.
Oh.
But what if we could transform that into a chatbot where you can actually talk to the turtle and you can learn about climate change, but then as you talk to the turtle and you ask it questions that maybe it doesn't know, or you hold up objects it doesn't know, it starts to learn and it starts to record what people are asking it and can feed that back into the experience. So it's kind of that ever iterative form of interpretation that you just don't get with kind of panels or models.
Absolutely, and we've been talking about this over the last few days quite a lot, this idea of agency and the agency of the audience that they can bring to the museum, right? And empowering children perhaps to then have that agency to take parents along and have them engaged in the experience. And I think that's this idea of storytelling is a really neat segue into Will, you providing some perspective around, you know, your work within Story Futures and just your deep experience within the space.
And if I can, I'm also just going to do a quick plug, which is we've got a masterclass next week with the creators of the RSC project. If anyone wants to go, I've just posted the Eventbrite link. I think there are still tickets there. Context. Okay. I think the context starts with most arts and culture in the UK is publicly funded, right? This is a terrible time to be telling everybody to make a technology leap forward. Most of the, I'm not saying terrible as in, it's a great thing, right? But in terms of access to finance and in terms of the sector, so many basic digital skills are the priority of the arts and culture sector across the UK. If you look at the funding that Heritage Lottery has got, if you look at the funding the Arts Council's got, there are some very basic things that it needs to put in place in order to build in resilience for this sector to move forward. What we're talking about is the sort of icing on the cake, right? And what we have to get to understand is, where do these amazing institutions get the finance to do some of the things we're talking about? And how does it get the leadership in place that understands that this stuff is the next turn of the wheel of the internet? It's not a nice to have, it's miss out, and you are, you know, however obsolete you may think yourself in a few years' time. So I think the context is really one of, this stuff is amazing. It's amazing if you put it in a physical building, and that's why immersive and cultural sector stuff is so important right now, because the awareness and distribution of these forms of content experience into audiences doesn't exist really. We don't have a widespread distribution for VR headsets. We have quite significant uptake when it comes to augmented reality, but the magic lies in the synergy between the physical and the digital right now. And that's why you're seeing all of these amazing experiences in arts galleries and museums and so on. The challenge is, where do you get the money to put them together? And that's maybe where the context is, which is, Asha mentioned it, audiences of the future. Publicly funded R&D. What am I? A massive publicly funded R&D project. What museums and galleries and institutions may want to do is start to realise the opportunities they have to be guinea pigs for other people's R&D, and to understand that it's not going to be the Arts Council, it's not going to be Heritage Lottery or your traditional funders that will move you forward in this space. You've got to look at where this innovation is happening, and you've got to think about where you go to be a part of it, and you've got to be imaginative in the way that you think about it.
Yeah, that's such a critical point. The idea of, you know, being able to get buy-in at the leadership level, and then be able to define and you know, identify where the resources are likely to come from. This sort of public-private partnership in some respects, and the idea of experimentation and collaboration with SMEs is something that's really true to our heart within Musemio, and, you know, all of my work previously. I guess one of the things maybe we could talk about is, you know, how do you sort of imagine taking those sort of first steps in collaborating with SMEs and sort of companies that are trying to do something? And, you know, museums are thinking about, or cultural institutions are thinking about, trying to appeal to all demographics, but maybe the sorts of collaborations aren't always focused around trying to serve all. So I guess, it's a sort of two-part question. What would be some of your sort of perspectives on taking those first steps with SMEs and just being open to collaboration? And then the second question is, what are your thoughts about how you're producing content in contexts relevant for some or all demographics? Anybody want to kick off with that?
In terms of how you move forward within the sector we find ourselves in here, within a culture of arts, like the arts and culture landscape, I would say go talk to your funders initially about the sector support that they offer. So Arts Council have a number of organisations that are always worth talking to, probably because the initial conversation should be free, right? So you've got arts marketing agency, you've got the audience agency, you've got the space, you've got people who in Heritage Lottery, they've put £1 million into digital skills building in the last month or two. You need to understand who in your own sector should give you free and impartial advice that should give you a foothold into these sorts of dialogues with companies. The other people are obviously sign up for Immerse UK. If this is of interest, just sign up, get a dialogue, do your basics, get on the newsletters, right? And then start to grow your interest, awareness and literacy. Talk to people like Amy, who's clearly, an active engager in this space. So I think you've just got to get the curiosity bit done. And then you've got to start making yourself available for how do I do this in such a way that it doesn't cost me a lot of money, but I get to learn. So one of the ways we advise a lot is a lot of R&D investment is difficult to broker or be a part of unless you have a partner who'll help you do it. And a lot of universities are very good at this sort of thing. So start a consortia that would allow you as a cultural institution to go, I need to know more about this. Why don't I partner with somebody who I could do an R&D application or something? And why don't I make myself a guinea pig? Why don't I make myself the venue for an SME's innovation practice? But always think about how am I keeping my costs down whilst I learn about this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of value in reaching out to like local universities and trying to find ways to partner with them to do this kind of work. Yeah, it's a tricky one with funding, isn't it? We actually have a creative working group within Immerse UK, and that's been a big part, like conversation lately around the fact that there isn't any existing pot of funding for pot of funding to develop immersive content specifically in the UK, it makes it really challenging for anyone who's trying to like get their foot in the door with this stuff. I would personally love to see more collaborations between museums as well, to share the burdens of that cost. There's another AR, the Playlines organization that I mentioned before that was working with the National Gallery. They have a big AR festival that's coming out that's been done in collaboration with a bunch of different cultural institutions that I can't name yet, but seeing more collaborations like that, I think is going to be really important to share that kind of cost. I think another thing I would also recommend is really to get, I think you wanted to ask recommendations later, so I'll save that. But
we'll come to the recommendations and top tips in a little while. But Amy, maybe you've got a clear perspective on some of these audience members' needs and pressures and how maybe they're beginning to collaborate. What have you sort of seen as been some of those steps that they've taken?
I think sort of in a sort of real practical sense, for me, it's building museums' confidence in working with universities and tech businesses. I think that a lot of the digital skills provision within the sector is focused on what I would call basic digital skills. And I think there's a lot of people out there who are at that level already and they're looking for the next step or they're looking for the next thing. And I think the other side of it is realizing what you've got as an organization, the stories that you've got, the collections that you've got, because a lot of tech businesses and universities approach me desperate to kind of utilize those stories and those collections and put their technology into practice with the kind of content that the museums have. So I think that, you've got to kind of hold your own ground And going back to Will's point about kind of being a guinea pig for some of the technology, there's benefits to that, definitely. But I think some of the museums have been nervous about that, or have been burnt in the past by being guinea pigs and then not having the follow-up support. So I think just always when you're thinking about these projects, looking at the tech might not have the longevity because we know that it's developing really quickly, but you've got to have the support in place to make sure that that's not delivered. And then you're stuck with something that potentially breaks in 2 months' time and you don't have any money to kind of sort it out. So with that kind of funding point, looking at that kind of follow-on funding, and just in terms of kind of demographics, the WAVE project that I manage was definitely planned to be geared towards younger people. And I think we expect like this automatic connect between immersive technology and younger people. And I think we need to like move away from that into kind of more nuance of target audiences, and also recognizing that older people who've not used the technology before have lower expectations potentially because they're kind of not familiar with it, and they've never used a VR headset, for example, or augmented reality. And we've taken it to them and they've been absolutely mind blown. And so I think just really making sure that any collaboration that you work on is really rooted in your mission, your values, in line with your interpretation plan, if it's an experience, will make sure that it's a much easier experience than someone coming to you and saying, we've got this idea, can we do it in your space? Which can be quite a challenging relationship, I think.
Absolutely. And I think there's a real neat segue into talking about like how we're addressing these skills gaps, right? Both in terms of sort of, you know, whether it's your exposure to immersive as an audience member, like an older demographic, or, you know, probably more pertinently and relevant to this conversation, plugging those skills gaps within the organization. Will, I think the very first time you and I had a chat, we talked about this particular issue, right? Like, where do people go to understand how to take some of those first steps to plug those gaps? What I can say is that we've got a really fantastic workshop as a baptism of fire into sort of design thinking for immersive coming up later on today, guys. So hopefully you'll get some value out of that. But maybe, you know, beyond what you just shared with us, Will, with the workshop, can the panel sort of talk about where they think that they would go, or they would suggest people go to maybe begin to learn about how to get some of these skills and how to maybe acquire the knowledge to get that confidence to move forward? And then I'm going to come to a few of the questions that are coming up in the chat.
If we were to identify and bury down into like, what is the single thing, right? Let's really, like, what is the single thing you should take away in terms of go and look at what these things are doing? It would be game engines. And I think if I can share anything right now, it would be, if you can understand the potential that games engines will have for your business and what you're choosing to share with your audiences, that's possibly the thing that you could go away and look at what Unity and Unreal can do. And there are other game engines, of course. And then try and understand, because what we talked about, what the Royal Shakespeare Company have done is only possible because of the dynamic and the world that they've realized they can make happen with Unreal. And I think everything that and this is happening, this isn't just museums, right? It's happening in TV and film and in all sorts of sectors right now. And I think it's just this idea of go and have a look at what's happening in these spaces where games engines are starting to take hold, and familiarize yourself with what they can do and how other people are using them. So Fortnite's not a gaming platform anymore, not really. It's an entertainment destination. The vision for Fortnite is it's where you'll go for lots of things. It's where you'll go to have a one-to-one with musicians. It's where you may go for a theatrical performance. Maybe your museum can be in Fortnite, right? But I'm only being dramatic in order to illustrate a point, which is these things are literally game changers. So I think to find out, you've got to go and ask people, but there's a lot of publicly available information. Unreal themselves are very open in the amount they're prepared to share. And I'm not going to keep going on about it, but you must sign up what Immerse UK represent, and this is their mission. You must sign up to things like Knowledge Transfer Network. You must understand the resource on offer from Arts Council and Heritage Lottery and all these people. There is no single way of doing it. You're just going to have to be a little bit entrepreneurial and hustly and network.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, Unreal and Unity, which are the two major games engines that Will's talking about here, they're on our board actually. And Unity partnered with us the end of last year and now this year to do a series of Unity development courses. We have like a beginner one that's already kind of permanently available to members. And then not to be plugging Immerse, but just, if you're trying to think of where to start with these kind of skills, it is like a bit of a minefield. I think I wouldn't necessarily, I would say familiarize yourself for sure with those platforms, what they can do, but not necessarily like go retrain all your staff in Unity because it's also extremely time consuming and maybe not necessarily what you need. I think it'd be prudent to maybe get an XR consultant in or something for a couple of hours who can really just like check out the actual needs of your venue and what you're kind of envisioning, and they can let you know what technology can actually enable that to come to life or not, before like going down a rabbit hole of spending resource you don't have on the wrong thing, which is kind of what we don't want people to do. So yeah, Amy.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. And I think also, like, although we're all obviously advocates for immersive technology, don't feel pressured. I had a museum get in touch with me recently and they were like, we want to redevelop, we want a VR bit and we want holograms and we want this and we want that. And I was like, no, immersive tech should be another kind of tool in your interpretation belt. And as you're kind of doing your interpretation plan, if there's a gap or a collection piece that can't be out on display, or that you think that should be tactile but isn't, or a story that you can't tell in any other way, then that's where immersive tech can come in. And not wanting to do my own plug, but we've launched the Museum's Immersive Network because we were finding that there wasn't really one place for kind of discussions and that sort of training and CPD specifically for museums. So we're trying to kind of share best practice, talk really honestly about sort of the challenges that museums face when trying to engage with immersive tech. And we run kind of webinars and a podcast and things like that. So, there are different things kind of popping up to support because it is becoming more and more sort of used.
Absolutely, and hopefully it's just going to increase in terms of its prevalence and propagation throughout these networks. Right, so coming on to a few of the Q&As, and actually this is kind of also part of the top tips really. So we've had a few questions, similar questions around how do we even go about creating a budget line for this, or what do we think is an appropriate budget, and how do we think about production schedules, delivery, maintenance, internal staff resourcing to sort of service this kind of stuff. I can sort of say quite confidently that it doesn't have to cost the earth to get something that's pretty effective, but I'm keen to let you guys give your views rather than us talking about it from a Musemio perspective.
I think the problem is with immersive tech and budgets, it's like, how long is a piece of string?
I was just thinking that, Amy. I was just thinking that.
Yeah.
Depends what you want, how much interactivity or not do you want? Like it's a tricky question to answer.
Yeah, I think that's where your partnership comes in. For me, I wouldn't necessarily put together, as someone who doesn't personally, I can't make the technology myself. I would always need a collaborator. I think that's kind of a common theme through what we're saying. And I wouldn't put together a project without kind of finding a partnership or a collaborator first who can kind of talk you through the different options and the different layers, because you can spend literally millions of pounds, especially because the immersive tech is developing so quickly every day. But there are, lower cost things that you can do, and some of the technology is coming down in price, and there's some off the shelf things that you can do versus bespoke things. And I think for me, that's where collaboration is key.
It all comes back to really identifying, why does something have to use immersive tech? What's the idea that necessitates this? Who are you trying to reach? Do you adequately understand who's going to kind of come to this project? And then I think it's your familiarization with what is immersive. Now, we can't do them at the moment, but we do day-long introduction to immersive courses at Story Futures Academy, where we take people through 360 video, then we take them through interactive projects, then we take them through like high-end interactive games like experiences, and so you need to understand the spectrum of immersive experiences before you start thinking about what you're going to make. As everyone said, right, there's still, I'm assessing a project for the Taiwanese government at the moment, and there's a lot of proposals that are essentially just 360 video, right? Lots of 360 video. But it's still valid, right? 360 video can be executed very cheaply, and there are platforms like Vimeo and YouTube that allow. So there's on one end, that's immersive. So on the other end, you've got a full AAA VR game. So you just have to kind of identify where you think your engagement needs to be. And in terms of price and cost point, like anybody, right? You know, when I get a decorator in, I'm going to ask for 2 or 3 quotes. So I expect you to do the same with any form of immersive, like get people who specialize and get advice. You can get something pretty good in interactive VR for under 100 grand.
I'd also like to just jump in and also mention the fact that there's a lot of the price of a lot of things has come down a lot in the last few years. So even the fact that, you know, there's like LiDAR scanning built into the iPhone now, and, you know, to get a photogrammetry scan of like maybe an object in your museum, you can get a setup and do that quite easily. Well, easily, I mean, it's like cheaper than it used to be. It also stressed like the fact that when you create digital assets, think about what you can create that can have longevity. Like and also, you know, there's things like you can do some facial tracking on, you know, with your phone even these days, or like with certain attachments. It's, you know, try and get longevity out of the assets you create. So you could make, you know, one scan of one object, but then you could rig it in different ways and use it for different things. So try and think like that as well. It's just a thought. I don't know how you guys feel the same, but in terms of trying to get longevity out of your projects or what you're spending.
Does like sort of, it echoes a lot of what Musemio's mission as a company to collaborate with institutions is really all about, is that, you know, as a startup, we know that we can't try to break the bank of any of the partners that we work with, because we understand the funding pressures that are there. And so, you know, even a number like 100K for an interactive VR experience, that's a lot more actually than what we would look to put on a price tag for an experience of working with a museum. And that's certainly not a plug for our business, but it's just worthwhile knowing that there are also scales within scales, right? And you're going to find out a lot more about how we go about working with museums a bit later on in any case. The final thing I just wanted to ask is that there's a question around digital skills, and do we need to get exec members that have very good understanding of technology onto the boards of museums before we're able to go forward with things? I just want a kind of quick idea on this, and whether it's a yes or a no, where do we want to find people that have these skills? And I think we're just going to underline a few more points that we've already said.
I think that's actually a really great idea, and like it's a simple, easy way to get knowledge like quickly, and that's a value to your organization. Add someone to the board that's from the industry, and just have them come along and understand. I mean, there are so many amazing people in the industry that I think would be more than willing, and that are actually very passionate, even if it's not necessarily their personal day job, creating immersive experiences for the cultural sector. I think there's a lot of people in the industry that believe in it and have that passion, would be very happy to join boards of smaller museums to help them with that kind of thing. I mean, I was asked to join a board of an organization in Birmingham, you know, as an immersive tech it's called BOM, Birmingham Open Media Center, as kind of an immersive specialist to help them with that kind of area of looking what they're doing, and happy to do that. So I think that's a great shout, Kriss. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Final thoughts from Will and Amy.
Do you want to go first, Ben?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't think that it's a necessity before you embark on this. I think that, as Asha says, it can only help. I think what I think is most important is having a board that allow you to create a culture of innovation. Yeah. And if you're working on R&D projects, there will be failures, and there will be iterations, and there will be trial and error, and you need to have a board that creates that culture from the top so that it trickles down, because that can be the most difficult thing to fight against when you're trying to use technology that's maybe not fully developed, or you're working with a university who are viewing it as kind of a research project. So maybe not from the tech sector, but definitely people that know innovation.
If it's all right, I'm just going to jump to a question I've just saying. So if there's time, which is only to say, look, if you are looking for money in this space and you're looking for relationships and you don't want to talk to Arts Council England or Heritage Lottery Fund, there are 9 creative clusters across the UK who exist to fund the UK's immersive economy. Just look where they are. If you fall within their region, start a conversation. 2, look up the Arts Humanities Research Council, who fund a lot of creative industries R&D. Look at what they're funding, see the grants, then go and talk to a university as to whether or not they'd work with you on a grant application that would allow you to be a recipient of the funding, and then you can create something. Look at what UKRI, who's the overarching R&D funder in the UK, look at what they're putting out as calls so you can familiarise yourself with what sort of money and what sort of challenges are being funded in the immersive landscape. I am not an advert for what Asha does, but if you're not signed up for the Immerse UK stuff, none of this will land in your inbox. And that's how you're going to start this journey. All right?
Yeah, thank you, guys. So what a fascinating and really inspirational and information heavy first panel for everybody to kind of go on and ruminate on. Amy, Will, Asha, I can only thank you and once again, and look forward to speaking to you very soon. And I'm going to stay here because I'm running the next panel too.
Thanks for doing this, Kriss. Really.
Guys, thank you.
Bye, guys.